Let's take a look at how we can call a JavaScript function from .NET. So I've got the standard two projects, my Silverlight project and my web project. Let me go to my SBX page here and write a JavaScript function. So we're going to write some script. And we'll write a function in here. Let's just call this add. We'll say I and j, something like that. And we'll just return I plus j, something like that. So let's now switch over to the .NET world and see if we can build a piece of UI. Let's just go and add onto our main grid here a button, font size. Let's right click equals on click. Let's put a little margin around it as well so it doesn't look quite so ugly. And let's pop to the code behind this and collapse a few namespaces and write an event handler for on click. Okay, so now we're behind that button when somebody clicks on it. And what we want to do is reach into the HTML page, grab the window. We want to invoke a function which is called add, and the parameters we want to pass, well, it's up to us really. Let's say 10 and 20 or something like that. This will give us an object result, and what we'll do is we'll simply say that the button that we've got on the screen, which we haven't named, so let's just name that. Let's pop back to the other window and just give that a name. We'll say my button. Pop back to our code. Let's say my button.content equals result.toString. Let's go build. Let's press F5. Let's click that. And we can see that we're calling through into JavaScript and invoking that function, so it's pretty neat. Now, if we wanted to pass more complicated types, then what we could do, we could quickly define a class. Let's just define a class. We'll call it operand. And on that class, let's put a property. We'll call it x, and we'll put another property. We'll call that y. And we'll mark this to say that this is scriptable. So these are scriptable types, and these are scriptable members of that type, which means we can access them from JavaScript. We could also define ourselves a return type. Let's call this result, and on there we'll put a value, let's say float, which is the result, and we'll mark this up once again. We'll say this is a scriptable type, and we'll say this is a scriptable member. Okay, so we've got that now, and what we want to do is we want to invoke add, but instead of passing 10 and 20, what we want to do is pass a parameter. So let's define the parameter first. We'll say operand. Let's call it argument equals new one of those, and we'll just pass x equals 10, y equals 30, something like that. We're going to pass that to add with argument here, and we're going to expect that what comes back from this thing is now a result. So we'll say result equals that as result, and then finally what we'll say is result dot value dot toString. So we need to go and change our JavaScript to deal with this new argument. Let's go over to the JavaScript, and what we're receiving now is some kind of argument, and what we want to do is we want to add arg.x plus arg.y and turn that into a result. Now, how do we go about creating one of these results without being given any means to do so? Well, what we need to do is go back into our C# code and take an additional step. So let's pop back into our C# code. Let's add a loaded handler here. We'll just say on page loaded. And what we'll do in that loaded handler is we'll register this result type as being creatable by JavaScript. So there's a method which does exactly that on HTML page. We can say register creatable type. We give it a name for the JavaScript, so we'll call it result type, and we give it the type that we're talking about, which in our case is result. Okay, so now having done this register creatable type, we can go back to our JavaScript and we can create one of those things. So let's get hold of the control. So we'll say plugin equals $get XAML1 is my Silverlight control, and then we can say result equals plugin dot content dot services dot. These are members that we can use to then create an object of a registered type, which for us we just set to result type over here, so we can pop back to the JavaScript and say result type. So that should create one of those objects for us. We can then say result.value equals, and that's going to be arg.x plus arg.y, and we should be able to say return result. Okay, let's see if we can debug this. So we'll just go and make sure that my debugging is set to not Silverlight but script, and we can press a breakpoint there. Let's go and run. And we can click the button to call the add function, and then we get the plugin, we create a result, we set the value, and we return it. However, we hit a bit of a problem, so let's break. And the problem we're hitting is getting this result back across to the .NET code. So over in the .NET code, what we're doing is we're trying to take the return value of this as a result. This isn't actually going to work. What we need to do is use an intermediate object, which is what's going to be returned here. We use an object called a script object. Let's say script object equals, and this is going to be set to the result of doing this invoke call as a script object. So what we did previously was okay when we were dealing with a primitive type, which is an integer, but in this world we need to use something slightly more complicated. Within that script object will be a result, so we can say result equals script object dot managed object as result. So inside of the script object that comes back from this call, there is a managed object which represents our object, and we can finally take that result and put the value into the content of the button again. So let's go and rebuild. Let's go and clear our JavaScript breakpoint, press F5, and if we hit our button this time, we can see that we are now indeed adding those two numbers together in a slightly more complicated way than we were before, by passing a complex argument operand across to JavaScript and receiving a complex argument result back in as a return type, and then just putting that onto the screen. So we had to do a little bit more work with register creatable type, and we had to do a little bit more work with script object here, and a little bit more work in JavaScript to actually use this create object function. But it's a useful thing to know about, is how you can create .NET types that are registered from JavaScript. And again, we get the power of interoperability between .NET and JavaScript, this time calling from .NET into JavaScript and getting values back.